You're going to have fun. Everything I say today is guaranteed to be true. There's no fudging here. There's absolutely everything is true. Okay, not so much. Number 2. Okay, I need a round of applause for Linda arranging this room.
I was going to go back here and sit.
Number 3. My name is Archie Call, and after this meeting, I've got some books to sell, and they're only $25. So, does anyone want to ask me the name of the book?
What's the name of the book?
Okay, how to donate $25 to the Black Hole. Okay, and number 3, I forgot what the hell number 4 was. What was it? Okay, I think I know what it was. Can't remember. Okay, so before we get started, dim the lights, I just want to give you a little background. About a year ago, I started digging into ancestry stuff, and I remember Geraldine Fuller telling me about Montezuma Fuller, and he was an architect, and he was important in Colorado, Fort Collins. I had no idea where it was. So about a year ago, I started looking all this stuff up, and I found, lo and behold, I found a bed and breakfast, I found all this stuff, information about him. I said, this guy is somebody. So I found a picture of a bed and breakfast I sent to some of you, and I called up. I said, hey, I think I'm a great-grandson of this guy you named the room after in the house. He says, great. So in April, I told Chad, I said, I think maybe we should go out there and visit. So I found a website that talked about Forgotten Fort Collins. It had all kinds of stories and articles about Montezuma Fuller himself. So I sent her emails, and I said, do you know a guy named Montezuma Fuller? Because I'm his great-grandson, and maybe you know him. And she sent me immediately back, do I? She said, that's my whole thing, is to get his houses and get them restored. There are many of them are on the historic registry. Just to give you an idea how prolific this guy was, when he got to Colorado, he started doing everything. He built and originally designed totally 400 homes on the Front Range. This is a picture of the Front Range there. I'll dim the lights here a whole bit. And he sold plans and did windows and all this stuff for 1,200 other homes on the Front Range. And that was on a 42-year period until he passed on. So that gives you a little background about what it is. So go ahead and dim the lights. All right, so, this is a picture of the Front Range just outside of Fort Collins. Okay, he was born in 1858 and he died in 1925. And a farmer, carpenter, shipwright, designer. Every trade there is in his genes, okay? And all of his ancestry coupled together to produce this guy. It's like, if you talk to the people out there, they say it's like the Garden of the Gods. He just was like shoved down into Fort Collins out of nowhere. He just came there, and just through his force of will, he became a famous architect out there. And all of the fancy homes out there are his. So, don't click ahead. I'll click ahead. So this story is about his ancestry, his life story, and most important of all, it's about his legacy. Okay, and Livia will read a little bit about the legacy in a little bit. So, anyways, this is the website that Meg Dunn ran that talked about Fort Collins, and I do a number of discussions. And we went out there to visit, and she arranged all the major historians. They have Linda's got a historical site, okay, place, and there's only one better historical place, and that's the Call Hall, right, Linda? But anyways, they have a historical site out there you will not believe. It's like a big library built. It's like bigger than this complex, and amazing. But she arranged a tour for me of all these people, and we saw all the houses that he had. So we found they dedicated a whole street after him. It's called the Montezuma Fuller Alley. That was dedicated in 2010. They said we should do this, and they didn't even know there were Fullers living. So I called them up. I said, man, it would have been nice if you were out there in 2010. So Shay and I went out there and visited in April of this year, and it was unbelievable. But here's the house we stayed in. It's called the Edwards House. It was one of the early on houses he designed. It was a classic kind of house. If you look along the top there, you see all these corbels up here. A lot of his designs follow those corbels, and that comes from his nautical background. But this is called a four square. I don't know if anybody knows about houses, but four square means it's perfectly rectangular. Each floor has 4 rectangular rooms in it, 2 stories, and then a half story up. And that's where the Montezuma Fuller suite was. Unbelievable. Nice. They put I don't know how many million in there to restore this, but it's gorgeous. This is the ancestral home where Graham Fuller was born, and I don't think he wasn't born here, but it was built maybe 5 years after he was born. But all the kids grew up here, and that house just recently sold for $450,000. It's unbelievable. The finished carpet, it doesn't show out here, but it's on the historic registry. All the kids. What's the question? We need questions because otherwise it's going to go on for a long time. We need them. Okay.
Archie, what's the house used for now?
It's used by actually a marketing guy, right?
Right. Advertising.
Yeah, and it's only had 3 owners, but I think they just recently sold it for nearly $500,000.
Is it actually brick?
Yeah, the outside is brick, and he added on when he got more kids. To tell him about the front, when they added that inside, he made it match perfectly because he had 7 kids that were in that house.
Wow.
He was a shipwright originally, and all the putting together of the ribs of a ship, he used that in building his houses. So that's what the corbels signify, the ribs of a ship. And so
this is in the Old Town district of Fort Collins, and he built all of these. And look at the architectural detail. Unbelievable. Okay, this is where Colorado State, at that time it was called Colorado Agricultural, was there, and that's called Old Main. Montezuma in 1883 went there and took a 1-year course, I don't know if it was full-time, just to become a better draftsman. Okay, while he was there, they had an old barn in the back, and they didn't have enough people. It was growing like leaps and bounds. And Montezuma just rallied up everybody and said, we're going to make this into a classroom. And they didn't even mess around. They just started, and he just, through sheer will, he got this back classroom added. Every one of his male sons went here to a 4-year degree, all got architecture. Okay? Every one of his daughters went to a 2-year business school. Every one of the 3 sons, Graham went to a divinity school in Wheaton, Illinois, in Chicago. Another son, Paul Harrison, went to a school in Chicago, and this is, most people don't realize it. The second son, Robert K. Fuller, who had a son named Quentin, went to Cornell for his graduate degree in architecture. And he was a famous architect in Denver. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is Meg Dunn on her website, she put, this is one of the most important takeaways from this thing. It's all about legacy. So I'm going to have Libby read each paragraph, and then after she reads it, I'll click it forward. Go ahead, Libby.
There are things that we pass down from parent to child to grandchild. Photographs, stories, homemade furniture, favorite books, significant items of jewelry. Some families have a family Bible full of genealogical information. Others pass on property, houses, and land. These tangible objects speak to us of who our people were, what they valued, and how they lived. But some of our ancestors left behind legacies which can be enjoyed by a far wider range of people. Musical composers, authors, and architects come to mind. Their works pass into the domain of musicians, readers, and residents, creating communities among otherwise unrelated people. It has been through this context, the appreciation of a wider community, that I have learned about and grown to appreciate the legacy that Montezuma Fuller, an early architect, left behind in Fort Collins. But just last week I had the privilege of meeting Monty's great-grandson Archie Call, and I was able to connect to this part of Fort Collins' history in a whole new way.
Okay, and after we went there, they gave us a tour of all his houses. They found maybe 50 of them. I don't know how many. And we were going around, they would show you, okay, here's a Montezuma, here's a Montezuma. And while we were driving around, Shay knew a lot about his designs, and she said, well, what about that one? And I said, no, that doesn't look like it. And then Shay says, no, you better check that up, okay? And when we got back, about 3 days later, she says, you were right, because he designed houses for people, and sometimes they didn't meet his total taste, but he still would make them. He wanted to make money for his kids. This is his most famous design. It's called the Avery Building, and I sent pictures of this to some of you, but in the front of it, put a big column or a post. The idea of that is horses don't like to ride through by posts at high speed, so it would keep the bank robbers out. And it was put in there to request of Franklin Avery. And that post was still there until about 50 years ago, and they took it out when they redid it. But look at the detail in there. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, now we're going to go backwards in time. We need to talk about his ancestors. I don't want to belabor this too much, but it's a whole part of your history that you don't know. It's like, I didn't know it either, and it's just awakens you to some of the religious underpinnings of what's going on. Okay, in 1630, in England, okay, the Pilgrims had just come to America in 1620. There were 2 Fullers on that boat, Samuel, forget the other one, Benjamin or something like that. They were not our relatives, but they were part of 2 Fuller families that came here. At that time, religious persecution was rampant in England, okay? If you didn't believe in the King's way, it's the highway or your head, that's about what it amounted to. And so what happened was all these Puritans got together and they got an appointment or a charter to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, okay? And they started streaming to New England. It started in 1630 with a guy named John Winthrop. Does anybody know it? Heard that name? Yeah. Famous name in New England. They started streaming. At the time, England had a population of 5 million people, okay, and they had 15 million sheep. I'll get into why that's important. Okay, the Puritan Robert Fuller in 1630 was 14 years old. Okay, what I'm going to do is move this damn mouse inside of here. Okay, so at that time, King Charles I was the king. Okay, he kept his head for about another 25 years until Cromwell came in. Okay, and that was 1649. Okay, he reigned from 1625 to 1649. He hated Puritans. That's why all these Puritans were leaving England. And the other thing was the Puritans hated him because he married a Catholic. I mean, it was unbelievable. He married a Catholic, and so the Puritans says, okay, we're out of here. And so he also believed in the divine right of kings, which he says, okay, I'm all powerful, everybody, no one else counts. So that was his thought process. This is Rednall, England, where all the Fullers were from. So a lot of tombstones out in front there, all these Fullers. And that's kind of over on the eastern part of England, a little bit east of London by maybe 50 miles, kind of near the coast. All the Fullers were originally from there. Okay, this right here, right there is a picture of 10 Fullers singing while fulling. That's in the 1500s in England. When you had wool cloth, okay, you had to full it. What the full did was you stomp on that for 20 minutes, and while they're pouring hot urine, I'm not talking about from cows, I'm talking about from people. Okay, this guy over here in the corner, he's like the Fuller master. Okay, so these ladies would sing songs, and then he'd pour hot urine on there, and they're pounding on, just like Lucille Ball. Remember she pounded on the grapes and all that? Same thing here. They would sing songs. They would sing, each song was about 6 minutes. And then that Fuller, after
sheep's urine?
The Fuller, it's real urine.
Human urine.
Human urine. You got to heat it up too. And then they stamp on it, and when they're stamping, that cloth moves down the line. They move to the left, move to the right, stand up, sit down, fight. And they just keep doing that. And so finally, after about 17 minutes, this Fuller master, he's got to check that wool out, because if you full it too much, it doesn't get good. It's like card paper. Not enough, it's too hard. It's just right, maybe 16 and a half minutes, 17 minutes. So he sings the songs, and he kind of knows he's checking it out. Okay, that softens the full. It felts it like a hat. It purifies it, and it's ready to go. It's stronger and a better fabric. Okay, the only problem was that kind of fulling was a bitch. It's hard. And so mechanical fulling came in right around 1600. When all these Fullers are leaving, they said, oh, we can't full anymore. This mechanical fuller that was run by water, it wasn't run by coal. The water would go around and run those stompers up on the ground. That guy would pour the wool in there, and somebody back there pouring the urine on it. That's how it went on until the Industrial Revolution with coal.
Okay. How'd they collect the urine?
They went around to the houses. They actually did with buckets, just the way the calls collected. Too. And they go around in buckets, and then they have a big bucket there, and he puts it over there and he heats it up, and it stinks. You know, it's awful. But anyways, and the great.
Our downstairs bathroom.
The migration started 1630 to 1640. John Winthrop came in. Over a 10-year period, 20,000 of these Puritans came in. They were searching for religious freedom. Okay, the traits of a Puritan were really, as opposed to a pilgrim, were to purify the church from within. They wanted to change the Church of England to be their way, but they still wanted to be part of the Church of England. Pilgrims wanted to have their own church, the hell with everybody else. No one telling us what to do. So the Puritans and the Pilgrims never got along. Okay, they hated each other. The Puritans, they hated Baptists, they hated Quakers, they hated witches, they hated Catholics, and they hated Indians. They really pretty much hated everybody. And they don't like anyone having fun. Okay, they don't like any symbolism. You know, they don't like Christmas or any kind of symbol. They're grunt. They just down to do their thing. And one of their traits was taming a child is like breaking a horse. I mean, you would pound the kid into submission. It was not good. Okay? Discipline was harsh and extreme. If you were a kid and you talked back, you know, it was bad. I don't want to tell you what happened. Okay, they're hard workers, no idle time. Every day was disciplined. A lot of religion, all that type of thing. On Sunday, okay, you never had a family reunion and drank beer. Okay? And you had to have at least 10 hours of services on Sunday. Okay? Note to myself, those are tough cookies. That's the way they were. A lot of people thought they always wore black. They did. They wear kind of like browns and like light colors. So black was too hard to keep clean. Okay, I need questions now, guys. This is a ship he came over on, the Beavis of Hampton. And it was Southampton, really, that the ship came out of. It had 61 souls on it. And I got the log of it. And he did come on that boat, but he was actually a worker. And they all made it over okay. And on the way over, Robert either met his future wife there or on the next ship, I'm not sure. But here's a diary that we found. It's called the Diary of Hope, 1638 to 1676. The whole family, okay, the wife, 2 kids, and a son-in-law all died in King Philip's War. That was a nasty war, and who knows who was wrong. Remember, the Puritans hated Indians, but then their land was being taken away, so they had a big uprising, and as a result of that, there was a tremendous upheaval in the family of Robert Fuller, and it involved where they moved around. But this diary accounts his wife, Sarah Vaughan, on her trip to America in 1638, her marriage to Robert, their early life in Salem, the birth of their children. They moved to Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and then they died in King Philip's War. And then they had a daughter, Abigail, that picked up this diary and completed it in her own words. And so this lady found the diary and she's got it. But we bought that book and it's tremendous. It tells you about Puritan life. Okay, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. We got 300 years from Robert Fuller to Janice Fuller. You know Janice, right? 300 years. Robert was born in 1616. Janice was born in 1916. 300 years. So Robert Fuller was born, I'm just going to read his date and the rest of it I want. He was born in 1616. He married Sarah, came on the ship. They had 2 kids, John and Samuel, and they had a brother-in-law, Nehemiah. Those were the 3 that died in the war, and Sarah died in the war too. Okay. They also had a surviving son. That's the only reason we're here today. Benjamin Fuller Sr. Okay. And then he married a Mary Darling, and then they eventually moved to Salem. Okay. And then they had a son, Benjamin Fuller Jr., who had a wife, Tabitha, and they were in Salem, and then they eventually moved to Rehoboth, Massachusetts, and then back to, and eventually they moved to Lebanon, Connecticut. Do you know where Lebanon is, anybody? A lot of the people moved from Salem to Rehoboth because they needed land to grow something. Getting more kids, they needed land. Rehoboth didn't have enough land, so they moved to Lebanon. They had more land. Okay. Benjamin Fuller Jr. had a son, Noah Fuller, and he had a wife, Priscilla. I can't find her name. But then he had two brothers, Amos and Timothy. Okay? Noah Fuller and Amos and Timothy were the Fullers that went to Nova Scotia, all three of them. I'll get into that in a little bit. Okay? Now, the son, Elijah Fuller, had a wife, Elizabeth Dill. This is up in Nova Scotia. They had a son, James, who had a wife, Eliza Bishop. They had a daughter, Eliza Fuller, who had a husband, Leonard Fuller. Leonard and Eliza are Montezuma Fuller's mother and father. Okay? I'll give you a little bit of skinny. They were first cousins. Okay? And then Montezuma Fuller was born in Nova Scotia, and his wife was Anna Graham. Now, horror of all horrors, that's a Catholic. And those Puritans are turning over in their graves right now. Okay, so then Montezuma had a son, Graham, and he had a wife, Geraldine. I don't know how many of you met Geraldine, but probably most of the older people. And then Graham had a daughter, Janice, born in Siam, and a husband, Dwayne. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history of the people involved. It's probably about 10 generations. So each generation is about 30 years, so it gives you 300 years. Okay, so Robert Fuller, he was born in Redenhall. He was one of 8 Fuller families that came to New England. Okay, I need questions now.
You're doing a good job. No questions.
Okay. Another name for Fuller, okay?
Archie?
Yeah.
You bypassed, you went right over there, the 2 first cousins. Can you back up?
I'm going to get into that.
It might explain a lot of things.
Okay, I just want to tell you guys something great now, okay? So I'm doing all this Fuller history and all that, and so I'm doing all this history, and I called Lois. I said, Lois, there are some Fullers that came up there in Nova Scotia, and they went to Alva. She said, I don't know who they are. And so then I'm down there with Linda. Linda says, well, you know, I'm a Fuller. And I says, oh. And so I got to do the ancestry on Linda, but I think they're kind of the same line, but back about 100 years. And I'm not sure of it, but you said they were in Alabama, New York, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think it's the same line. Is there Cattaraugus? How far is that?
No.
A bunch of them got down to Cattaraugus. But anyways, Robert Fuller was a staunch Puritan, and he told the line. And he also was a stonemason. He was the only stonemason initially in Massachusetts of these Puritans. So anybody needed a hearth, he would do the stonework. So he had to travel to these houses, and the kids would be home, and they were fending for themselves. But he would do all the stone and the masonry work. And eventually he bought land in Rehoboth, Massachusetts from one of those big Puritans, I forget his name. But he bought it in 1645, but he didn't move there until 1668 because it took him a time to build a house, do it all. And that diary talked about their move from Salem to Rehoboth. It was a very difficult move. He would go there initially by ship, but then they had to move all their stuff. They went overland by 70 miles. It took a long time. So eventually 4 members die in this King Philip's War, and then they move back to Salem, gets remarried, and then moves back to Rehoboth. Okay, so here's where Salem is on the top. Salem, Mass, where they came into. Rehoboth is there, and then Lebanon, Connecticut is over here. So those are the 3 areas that they lived in New England, okay, from 1638 until 1760. 1760s, or 1759 or 60s are the point there. Okay. Now, this is kind of the way a house would look in Salem. Look at how they kind of, I don't know if anybody, have any of you been there? Okay. You've been there?
I lived in Boston. Remember?
You mean you went somewhere without them?
Are those roofs thatched?
They're all thatched. Yeah. Now the thing is, this construction was also in England at the same time. They did the same thing. So the guys that were collecting the urine, they'd go around to each house and pick it up. And here's a house in Plymouth, or remember, Plymouth and Rehoboth were pilgrims, and Salem was Puritan. They didn't get along, but Robert's line was a little more, he would kind of go back and forth. He wasn't totally one or the other. The pilgrims were a little more yeoman-like. They weren't into, a lot of Massachusetts are all industry. They were more heads-down farmers. Okay? So again, you got the same kind of roofs and all that. And so Benjamin Fuller Sr., he was the son of Robert. Okay, this is I got out of a book on the Fuller history. I think it was published in 1880, something like that. But he married Mary Dowling, and he had a son, Benjamin Jr. But the book says he's a man of retiring habits. I think what that means is you sit up on the front porch and don't do anything. I'm not sure. He had fixed and high-toned principles. I'm not sure what that means, but he was a hoity-toity. I don't know. But he had manly, enabling characteristics. But does anybody know what that means?
Who wrote this?
Anyway, it was in the book. Okay, he is best known by his personal and private acquaintance. Okay, keeps his mouth shut, I think. Okay, he never praised himself. Now, I've heard stories from Arch about his father, Albert, and it sounds just like Albert, but Albert isn't a relative of them because he's not a Fuller, but it sounds like the same kind of traits. But other people say he was well respected too. But my thinking was he was shy. Okay, now here's a picture of King Philip's War. I won't get into that, but they all died. It was not good. You can look it up on the web, King Philip's War, Metacom, etc. But in that war, 3,000 Indians died, 600 New England Puritans died, and that was like 15% of every young male died in that war because they were fighting. And all the Puritans would give them money to support it because England was not giving any money. And this war, more than any other thing, started the trait to the revolution, to patriotism, because England wasn't supporting them, and they were starting to try to tax them and all that, and they had to tax themselves to pay for it. So that was one of the things, taxation without representation. Okay, so the Fullers all moved back in 1680 because everyone's gone. He's got he's only got Benjamin left. So they moved back to that house right there. See, it's inside the wall? Okay. Now, does anybody know what happened in Salem in 1690? What happened?
Salem witch trial.
The witch trials. Okay, the Salem witch trials was, remember what happened in Leroy about 5 years ago? There were witches that were out there. They were twitching and witching and all that. Okay. Remember, these Puritans, they were, it's not like today. They didn't have all the scientific knowledge, and boy, there was a lot of stuff. They didn't like anything with that idea of demons was bad, or any superstition was bad. They did not like witches, and so they had these trials, and eventually, I don't know, but so many, mostly women, but few men, not too many. But here's the thing, okay? Within the Fullers, okay, there was a Fuller that accused a witch, okay? And here's the deposition of Mary Fuller. She was one of the daughters, okay? In the Salem witch trials, this lady come up. Her name was Rachel Clinton. And when the daughter was there, and he went like this. The girl goes just like those girls in Leroy. She falls down in a dead faint. They think she's dead, and they say in there, you're dead, D-E-D. And finally, after 3 hours, they bring her back, and the mother said, what happened? Well, Rachel Clinton went like this. She hunched her elbow, and she went down in a dead faint. They said, oh, this isn't good. Next morning, they go out. Their cow has been milked, and they see Rachel Clinton out there, and a black cat runs across the road. That's the end of it. That she's a definite witch. Okay? So they brought her to trial on this deposition, and they had the whole trial. And this is all because she's dead. That I don't have all the time for it. Brought her in the house, laid her on the table, da-da-da-da. And the guy that was there, he was the judge. I forget his name, but he was having a problem because they'd already done in about 12 or 14 of them. They had just accused his own daughter. And so at that point in time, he says, okay, we're going to change it. So they acquitted Rachel. She did not have any punishment. They let her out of jail, and she was free lady. Okay. Unfortunately, she was a lady that, a lot of these were women that didn't have money, they were kind of underprivileged. So it's like kind of, I don't know, but that's what led to it. So anyways, this was an awful situation. But there's an association called the Associated Daughters of Early American Witch Accusers. This was their annual meeting in Salem this year. Okay, and I have a formal application for membership in the ADIA. Okay, and we're going to, Sharon Claw, are you here? Yeah, okay. All right, we need to go take her gift. Okay, raise your right hand.
I'm giving you a question.
What?
That's a picture from this year's meeting?
We don't know whether witches or... Okay, right, okay. Do you swear that you will accuse all witches promptly?
I do.
Okay. Are you a female descendant of an early American witch accuser?
An accuser?
Yeah, that's an accuser.
All right, okay.
And are you a bona fide Puritan? Will you uphold all of their principles?
No.
Okay, then give that hat to Katie. No, you gotta wear the hat.
All right, okay.
No, but you're just an honorary member.
Okay, I'm on.
Okay, so there, okay, you can sit down.
That is this year.
What?
Where did you find those women?
That's a bona fide picture.
Where did you get
Never
those
tell
pointy
about it.
chins?
They're witches. Okay, so Benjamin Fuller Jr., okay, he married Tabitha Wheaton. Okay, they had sons, Nathaniel, Noah, and Ben. And Noah is our direct descendant in red. He was born in 1712. Okay, now remember, at this time, the Salem witch trials were just getting over, and the King of England says, Puritans, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. And it was about 100 years about, and so Puritanism kind of died out around 1710 to 15. Okay, so Junior tells his wife, we're leaving here, we're going to Lebanon, Connecticut. Okay, and so he has a couple more sons, Amos, Timothy, and John. Okay, ask me what John's occupation was.
What was it?
He was a minister. And ask me what Amos and Timothy were.
What?
They were counterfeiters. Okay? They were counterfeiters. Okay? They started, their mother died in 1737. When they got about 20s, they started a life of crime. Okay? And John, the Reverend, says, I'm out of here, I can't take this anymore. So his poor Noah's up there to defend his brothers. Okay? This is money that was printed by Benjamin Franklin.
See up there, good quality.
Yeah, I was up. See up there it says printed by B. Franklin, 1746. That was a note, I think, for New Jersey. Okay? And he printed down there to counterfeit his death. Okay? And that's a 20-shilling note. Okay? Now, the thing was, Amos was tremendous on the drafting board because he's making all that money. And they're going down to this Dover Money Club. They're printing it all up, and then they got to pass it all over the counties. It's better to get out of town, pass it somewhere else. And Amos had an alias called Jeremiah Carpenter and James Fuller. He had different aliases. But anyways, in this gang, okay, Amos eventually got caught hard, okay, put in jail in October of 1747, and he was there one night. He broke out of jail, and they put an ad in the paper: "Turn in Amos Fuller." He broke out of jail, wearing homespun jersey coat, brass buttons, leather breeches, yarn stocking, linen cap, pale complexion. Okay. Eventually, in order to get out, he had to agree to be branded with a letter C and his right ear cracked, taken off.
What's C for? Kirk?
Counterfeiter. Okay. Remember, they also crapped the cows. They would do the same thing. They put a brand and crop in the ear. Crop in the ear was either total crop or partial. I don't know. But this is in all the books I found, all the records. His brother Timothy was in and out of jail many, many times. Okay. In order to get him out of jail more than once, Noah had to sell his property and sell his own property and all that. Brother John moves. He said, I'm leaving. There's a couple of neighbor families, the Bills and Bishops. I might have known some of the names up there. Those are the same family names. Those are up in Nova Scotia.
Archie, where would they brand
Either the chest or the forehead. I think it might have been the chest, because later on Amos, he turned his life around a little bit, but he was still a promoter. He was like a land speculator, and he was a hustler. You know, he was not like Murray Paul. You don't speculate, do you? Usually only go aliens, whatever. But he did a lot of things kind of on the shifty side. But anyways, here's the Grand Prix. Okay, the first takeaway is that you go to Fort Collins to see all his houses. The second one is you get your butt up there to the Grand Prix. It's the most drop-down, gorgeous scenery you've ever seen. The Fullers own all of that property right there, pretty much all of it. And it's very valuable for a couple of reasons. First one is that before the New England planters went up there, it was all French Acadians. okay, and they started building dike system up there to keep the tides up there are 46 feet high, and so the last 10 feet would go in and wash across that Grand Prix. And they said, hey, this is not good. And anybody that knows Holland, you know, they build the dikes and have sluices, so there they are putting a dike in with a sluice. They raised it all up by 10 foot all the way around it to keep that seawater out during the high tides. And it made that property just beautiful, okay? So there it is working on. These are all French Acadians. And eventually these people all wind up in New Orleans, and they're called Cajun. French Acadian becomes Cajun. Okay? So then, and from 1755 to 1758, the French and Indian War is going on. These people have already been defeated about 25 years earlier, but they will not sign a loyalty oath to go with England. Because we're French, we're not going. They said they shoot at them, take pot shots, but they won't sign a loyalty oath. And finally, the King of England says, okay, that's it. Get them out of here. Rightly or wrongly, but they were beautiful people, I'm telling you. You know, New Orleans is beautiful. There's no crime down there. But anyways, anyways, this is a picture, a painting of 11,000. They had all these ships. It took about 3 years, and no one really got killed. They said, okay, you go with us or you will be killed. They all went. That's where they went out. That's right there. It's Horton Landing. Okay? Now, the Governor Lawrence of Nova Scotia, and we have a Lawrence, I don't know if you know that, but Lawrence Westbrook, that side of the family, there was a Lawrences. They were like French Huguenots or something, I'm not sure. But he was the Governor General of Nova Scotia. And he said, hey, we got all this beautiful land up there. Crops don't fail. You don't need any manure. It's there, you know. Land's all cleared. The French have all cleared it. 2 loads of hay per acre. Anybody that comes up here, if you have a bona fide proposal, we'll give you 100,000 acres free for the asking, and we'll even pay for your shipping up there and 2,000 pounds per family. But all you have to do is cultivate 1/3 of the property within 10 years. Open any serious proposals. Counterfeiter Amos, he immediately saw this in the paper, and he said, this is my get out of jail ticket. He started rounding up. He says, okay, free land up there. We're going to go out and check it out. If it does, will you go up there with me? And plus, Amos is trying to get away from his counterfeit. So, anyways, the 5 New England planters, of which Amos Fuller was one and John Hicks were one. They were in their early 30s, okay? John Hicks was a Quaker and Amos was whatever he was, counterfeit. And the other 3 guys were really respected farmers in Lebanon. The 5 of these people go up there and meet with the Governor Lawrence and view all the lands. And the 3 older guys, they immediately... they say, this is good. He said, we're going back and round up our people. But Amos, he stayed there, and instead of 1 town, he got 3 towns of his own. Got them all going, and along with Hicks, okay? And then Amos turns around after about 6 months up there and goes back to Lebanon, okay? And here's the sailing trip where they went up there. See that little coast up there on Nova Scotia where they go in? That's called the Minas Basin. Here's Lebanon, Connecticut down there. It's about a 500-mile trip by sailing ship. Okay, this is a monument. It's called Horton Landing. This is where the French Acadians went out in 1758, and it's where the New England planters all came in. And this monument was put in there around 100 years ago, just about 100 years ago. And it's beautiful. Okay, now here's a picture, a painting of the families coming in. And in an 8-year period, 8,000 people came almost entirely from Connecticut. And Amos was just getting them going. Up there, free land, okay? They go up there for the free land. He said, oh, can I buy your old land here in Lebanon? He'd give them about quarter price. You know. Then he knew they'd get up there after about 3 years. They wanted to come back. Oh, you want your old land back? It's going to be full price. So he was what's called a land speculator. So he wasn't a counterfeiter, he was a land speculator. Okay, so here's the Bay of Fundy. Has anybody been there? Okay, the Bay of Fundy has the highest tides in the world. Right in there, just north of St. Andrews, which is in the United States, are 40 feet. You get up a little further, this is where they're coming into the Minas Basin, 46 feet high every day, okay? And the water that's flowing in there twice a day is more water flow than all the world's rivers combined. Mississippi, Amazon. What's the question? Now, all the water combined, okay, and 46 feet high twice a day, and the flow rate is 1 cubic mile of water per hour. Now, does anybody can figure out how much water it is? Yeah, it's a ton of water, okay? So what happened is the Governor General...
You figured it out.
What? No. There's a picture of... He's already doing it. He's a, Okay, so there's... Okay, see that water going in there? Okay, 1 cubic mile of water per hour. Okay, see it coming in there? That's high tide. Okay, so the Governor General of Nova Scotia says, this is not good. This water is going up and down. We need to stop this. Okay, so we need to... He gets a hold of A.D. Fuller and Sons. The proprietor is Quentin Fuller. Okay, Archie Fuller doesn't work there. Okay, and they have a motto. It says, "We suck, you don't." Okay, so the Governor General says, "Okay, Quentin." He says, "How many? What is it going to take to pump that dry?" Craig gets a hold of Jerry. He says, "Jerry, figure that out." Jerry says, "Dad, it hurts my mind." He goes all to Robbie and Jamie. He says, "Figure that out." And he said, "Okay, it's 147 billion cubic feet per hour." He said that amounts to 182 million truckloads of water per hour just to keep up with it. Okay? And so Jerry gets a hold of Quentin. He says, "Quentin," he says, "we need a whole lot more trucks." So anyways, here's after they come to drive. That's what it was. That's 182 million trucks. I don't know what the heck they do with the water. That's what that basin looks like. It's pumped dry. It does that twice a day. It's amazing. Okay, and so there's one thing about that. It's like it changes your philosophy. Okay. The other thing is this water's going up and down twice a day, and you get the Bay of Fundy head. It's like, oh, I'm tired of this, but that's the way it was. Okay. Now go back to the Grand Prix. This is the Midas Basin, the Grand Prix. See that church there? And Amos Fuller, he got 750 acres apiece for the three brothers. That basically was most of that area. Everything you see there was Fuller's. If they still owned it today, I mean, we might just well be down in Miami Beach, just with our money. Okay, this is a church. It's right in the middle. I forget the name of it, but Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem, Evangeline. It's about a French Acadian girl that goes to meet her lover in New Orleans and all that. But a lot of it has to do with a lot of the disgrace of kicking out the French Acadians. Okay, and he was put onto this by Hawthorne. Does anybody know who that is? He's another writer or poet. He says, "Go check it out." So he did, and he said, "Oh, this is good." So this is a poem he wrote. I'm going to have Libby Fuller read it.
Waste are those pleasant farms, and the farmers forever departed. Scattered like dust and leaves when the mighty blasts of October seize them and whirl them aloft and sprinkle them far o'er the ocean. Naught but tradition remains of the beautiful village of Grand Prix. I want to go see it. I mean, I got videos. It's unbelievable. Okay, so now let's go to Nova Scotia. Noah on the top. Noah and Eliza are the two, the father and son that go up there. Okay? When they get up there, now, first thing I want to tell you about Nova Scotia. All of these Fullers, okay, they were three things. They were carpenters, they were farmers, and they were shipbuilders, and all of those were intertwined. And all three of these, see John Fuller, James Fuller, and Stephen Fuller, okay, they were all, Stephen Fuller was the big shipbuilder, and his son Eliza was a master shipbuilder, okay. John and James would make investments in a given ship. They would get shares, okay, and Stephen or Eliza might get 40 shares in the ship, and James and John would take their extra farm money and carpenter money and put it in a ship. And so then the kids would go work on the ships and all that. And so all of those occupations were all intertwined. Okay, they just went back and forth. But the maritime shipbuilding influence in there is unbelievable. In its day, in the wooden ship area, remember the clipper ships were in there, and then the big wooden ships and all that. And Montezuma himself, okay, when he was a young man, his mother noticed, he said, "Monty," he said, "you're really good on the drawing board." He says, "You should go work with your cousin, Eliza,
and in Huntsville, so just 5 miles down the road. So he went down there and worked, and he learned the carpentry trade, and he started drawing. He did all the finished carpentry work of the officers' cabins, all of that, okay? And what happened is James has a daughter, Eliza, okay? And John has a son, Leonard. Okay, and Leonard's real first name is really Elijah. And you talk about, at first when I was doing this, I said, I didn't know what it was, but Elijah is a man's name, and Eliza is a woman's. But anyways, Leonard, Eliza Fuller, and Eliza Fuller are first cousins. They got married in Boston, okay? And then they had all the various children. 3 of them were born in Boston, and then as the Civil War was approaching, and they wanted to go back, and they went back to become more farmers and shipbuilders. A lot of times they were going back and forth from Boston to Nova Scotia, because it was really only about a one-day trip on a sailing ship. But anyways, Montezuma worked in this town of Huntsville, which I'll get to shortly. Okay, now this is the last will and testament of Noah Fuller, and he is witnessed by a next-door neighbor. He wants his soul to go to the power of the gods. He wants his body to a decent burial in the ground. To his wife Priscilla, he gives her half of the house, a cow, and a breeding mare, but that's only if she remains a widow. Okay. To his son Elijah, he gives 1,100 acres of dike land. That's the land that's worth money. If we had that today, it would be mine each. To his son Timothy, he gives 70 acres. He was challenged. To his son Noah, he gave one divided dike lot, a sucking pig, and a goat. And to his 4 daughters, he gave 5 pounds a cow, and a mare. In those days, they kind of, the women were kind of like non-anything. That's the way it was.
Hey, Arch.
Yes.
What is a sucking pig?
Sweet. Remember how Wendell would call the pigs? How are you doing? Sweet.
I forgot her.
This is a picture of James Fuller and his wife Amelia. This is Montezuma's maternal grandparents, and it's one of the early pictures. I mean, it was before the Civil War was taken. It's a very good picture. And he was well respected. Everybody said this guy is something. And you can tell by their dress that they were not yeomen. But what he was doing was the McKay shipyards in Boston were building all the big clipper ships that were in the gold rush. Remember that? And they would go around the Horn to San Francisco in 88 days. All the fast clipper ships were built at the McKay shipyards. So they found out about James and said, get your butt down here. We need you to kind of get a hack on him, get him moving. So James would go down there and get him going. He would go back and forth. He was going back and forth between Nova Scotia and Boston in these 2 different shipyards. And the farming, he left other Fullers up there. But when he was in Boston, he called Leonard down. He says, come down here and work. So they worked in the clipper shipyards, Montezuma's father, and they got married there, Leonard and his daughter, and they had 3 children. Okay, and then here's a picture of the McKay shipyards in 1855, and an actual picture where they're building clipper ships. Okay, and here's another one where the clipper ships in 1852. And another one in 1852, and those are the fastest ships in the world at the time for long distance hauling. A packet ship was better to take passengers across the Atlantic, but for speed to get over to San Francisco, that was the way to go. Okay, now people ask, well, how did Montezuma get his name? Because his whole life he hated that name. And he always called himself M.W. Fuller instead of Montezuma. It was only after his death that they discovered the name Montezuma, because any place his ads in the paper, the newspaper, is always M.W. Anybody knows M.W.? In the family Bible, Mortimer. You know, in his own Bible, Mortimer. Any reference was to Mortimer, it wasn't Montezuma. But it's obvious that his father wanted the son Montezuma. By coincidence, in May 18th, 1854, right off of Jones Beach on Long Island, there was a big packet ship bringing a load of Irish immigrants, probably Jones relatives, or I don't know. Is anybody else Irish in here? Are you okay? All your relatives came in. In the potato famine? What's her name? Yeah.
Patricia.
Last.
Karen.
Carol, that's Irish. Okay. So, a lot of Irish coming in. And Montezuma, he's working in those shipyards, and exactly like 12 days after that, he named his second son the middle name Montezuma. Great. Started his second son Montezuma, okay? So that's a picture of the ship Montezuma painting before it went down. And I think what happened with that ship, it was eventually, it went down right off of where the roller coasters are in Jones Beach, but no one died. Okay, it was in real shallow water. So later on they raised it, and there was a thing called the Stone Fleet. Do you know what that is? They towed all these wooden ships down to Charleston, South Carolina, filled them with rocks down there and sunk them to keep the Confederates out. So it was part of the Stone Fleet. Okay, so here's where Eliza Fuller built ships, and this is in 1863, and he was building, that's the world's largest wooden ship called the Marlborough. And I don't know, it's almost probably 300 feet long, very long. And it was built right there in Hudson. And this is where Montezuma worked when he was younger. Okay, this is the shipyard was owned by a guy named Ezra Churchill, and he had this is his house, his famous house. If you look at see all those corbels along the top, Montezuma would have done a lot of work in this house for his son on finished carpentry work because he was that type of guy, and he got a lot of inspiration from that house. Now here's a picture of a ship. You see the corbels in there, and those corbels influenced him in all of his designs. Here's a picture of another ship. It's a modern day replica, but if you look at the back and see the transom, a lot of its windows would follow that kind of design. Okay, now in Hotsport, this was in 1870s when Montezuma was working there. This is what it looked like. And the Governor General, he gets a hold of Philip Fuller. He says, Philip, says, we need a road. We need that road paved right there. And Philip says, Gov, you suck. You can stick your contract. We're moving to Florida. So I think I got every call around there. So, oh, yeah, I got them all. All right, so Montezuma, 1879, he announces to his father's brother, he says, I am out of here. I can't take it. I don't want to be a farmer. Too much of this dirt work and all that. I want to seek my own fortune. So he heads down to Kingston, New York. I don't know why, but this is probably how he went to New York City and took a paddle wheel up to Kingston. Anybody know where Kingston is? Okay. Beautiful area. And it's right on the Rondell Creek. Okay, here's a picture from right that same year, what it looked like. And Montezuma's father-in-law, Guy Green, had a daughter, beautiful daughter, named Anna. And when Montezuma was down there, Guy said, Monty, I want to introduce you to someone. And they introduced him to Anna. And it was like he was love-struck. Okay? And Guy ran a water taxi. So what he would do is pick up people from the paddle wheeler station, run them up to the railroad station, take people across the river. He'd been doing that for 10, 12 years, and he's doing it for a long time. But anyways, Montezuma woos his daughter, or courts it, as Shay would say, and that was a very famous town at the time. And so the next spring, Montezuma says, I am out of here. He says, I'm going to Colorado. And he travels west, and he goes to Chicago, St. Louis, Denver, Greeley, and eventually Fort Collins. We think the reason he went to Colorado is because Guy had a daughter that lived in Denver. I think that, I don't have that for a fact, but he might have gone there because that's a picture of an actual kind of railroad at Kingston. Okay, Colorado in its day, during that time, the gold rush had just happened in 1860. Colorado just became a state in 1868. 1876, there's a Union colony in Greeley. There's the Meeker Massacre in Greeley. The railroads are getting to Denver. You could get there in 2.5 days from New York. It's really good. Now, one thing with Colorado is there's a ton of tuberculosis sanitariums. If you ever go out there and read the history, 1/3 of the people that were living there at this time were in sanitariums because of tuberculosis, because of the dry air and all that. And the other thing was there was a housing boom. This is a picture that Shay took. I showed it to her one time. I know what that picture was when you took. Okay, here's what Fort Collins looked like in the 1880s. Kind of a frontier town and all that. Okay, here's their wedding picture. There's Anna. There's Montezuma. January 27th, 1881. That's 134 years ago. And it's like amazing. It's like your life is, you look at him, look at his eyes, look at her eyes. It's like history coming back, you know. That's one of the nice things about doing this is you can put yourself back in their eyes. He was always a good dresser. You know, it was his wedding. He was always immaculate in his appearance.
What's in his hand?
He had a gun there, didn't he?
Don't know. It's a Bible.
He got a handgun.
It's a Bible. Yeah, in the Bible he said his name was Mortimer. Okay, but that was that's his actual wedding day. Beautiful picture. And his wife Anna. He was 6'4" tall.
Oh.
He always had a serious frowning kind of look on his face. Okay, here he is in his office in 1907 in the Avery building where he worked. You notice he's at the drawing table. He's got a T-square, reading glasses, dressed to the nines. He was a man of, I don't know, but when people were around him, some of us, I didn't get that trait, but there's other calls probably get it. But,
You're a pretty good dresser, Arch.
but I'm not, people don't respect me. But he was heads down working, okay? This is how and when he worked with people, the best of the best, all the best houses he did it, anything best, okay? Here's his family. Okay, Graham was your first born, okay? And he married Geraldine. He became a missionary in Siam. The second son was architect in Denver. He became architect there, and I know Quentin looked up his history. He had a son named Quentin, and he designed many famous buildings there. His third son was a daughter was Frances, and I just recently looked up her history, and it's unbelievable. I got some wedding pictures of their family. It's like unbelievably, they're a prosperous family, even though it is at his time. Okay, the third daughter, Bessie, was named after the mother-in-law, and she died young after about 19 years old. And then the next one, Dorothy, she married a man who became a manager of a refinery out in California. Watrous was an old famous name in Fort Collins. The next son, you probably don't even know that, because no one ever told me this story. He had a brother named Paul Harrison, who was also a missionary in Siam. All three of those boys had a 4-year degree from Colorado State and plus an advanced degree, one place or another. And then the fifth daughter, she married a minister in California. Now, every one of those kids were singers. Okay, every record that Shan and I found is they loved to get together at night and sing in the building. And he had an organ initially, then he bought a piano, and they would get together and sing. Okay, he was a skilled carpenter. He was a good eye for design. Everything was nautical. He worked very fast. He was a fast worker, heads down worker. He had an eternal frown on his face. He would scare the kids because he was so serious. They liked to sing at night with kids. Okay, he entered a contest in 1902, a national contest. He won second prize in this for his design, and he won $500. That was a lot of money in those days, and it was in carpentry. I didn't spell carpentry right, did I? And builder's magazine. Won second prize. You can look at all the details. He had good. He wrote a whole story about the house. Okay, here's the ancestral house that we grew up on. Historic. See the sign out front? Historic register. Just recently sold for $413,000. Talks about all stained glass windows. Okay, here's his 3 daughters that were surviving. The oldest down to the youngest. And there's Monty sitting in the background. Every picture you see of Monty anywhere, he likes to sit in the background with other people that he did it for. And he just kind of, he's not a man that sought higher social status. He liked to do stuff, but then he kind of backed away. And there's the dates that the daughters were born. Okay, here's another one on the history. There's a Mossman house. And they go on and on and on. They're all a little different, but it depends on what the owner wanted. Okay, there's another one. There's another one. There's a downtowner. I showed you that one. Okay, here's another one. Okay, that's another one. Is that the house we stayed in, Shane?
Yeah.
Okay. There's another one. See the ship's transom and the windows. These are all restored, and they're all worth $300,000 to $400,000 or more. There's another one. Look at the corbels. That's the Peter Henderson house. That's on the registry. Okay, there's a church. He built and designed 10 churches in his lifetime. All big ones like this. This one was in Loveland. It's called the First United Church. That That yellow thing there, that hides another pickup truck. That was it. Okay, this is a German Congregational Church. There's a lot of Germans in Fort Collins, and one of the Germans was a nanny when Anna died in 1902. He had to hire a nanny. That was a German thing. There's a picture of Grace Presbyterian Church that he built. That church there was probably instrumental to Graham becoming a minister. They just finished it, and Graham was kind of working on it, and he said, I want to do that. And he didn't want to be an architect. He wanted to dedicate himself to the cause. Another one in Berthoud, Colorado. Look at that. There's another. It's like a hospital and a house. Look at the stonework. School. Big school. That school is still there, and then one of the guys that took us around there, it's called the Laurel Street School, he taught there. And it was built in 1906. There's another church or school in Loveland. There's another one, notice a car. That's probably in late 1920. He lived another 5 years past that picture. See the corbels up there? Okay, now, before I get to the end, anybody got any real questions?
It always had a lot of wide overhangs, almost like Frank Lloyd Wright.
See, I'll tell you that. Why? Because of the water and weeds and stuff.
Well, I think that's one of the design features. If he was given a lot of freedom in designing a client's house, he would do those big lot overhangs, because then he could put the corbels in that gave it that nautical feature. It made it look like the roof, the line of the roof is coming down over the house.
Some of his houses don't have it, but then you can figure it out by looking inside. Okay, here's another one, a famous one. Okay, there's another one. That was for the son of Franklin Avery. A lot of those other houses, he would remodel them to go back in and fix them up, make them look better. There's another one. That's been recently redone. That's probably $500,000 at least. Another one. Now, see how that looks a little different, but it's one of his. These are apartments that he had his father-in-law run, Guy Graham, right next door to the regular. Okay, the son, Robert Kay, he went to Denver. This is the Colorado courthouse that he did. He worked at the Allied Company, but basically all his work. And at the time, his son Quentin was working, helped him do that. Okay, we went to the cemetery in Fort Collins, and this was what they saw there. He was either a contractor or architect for 325 to 400 homes. He also worked on 1,100 structures in the Front Range. And when business was slow, he installed ornate transom windows and other types of things inside the house. Okay, and they said his legacy lives on in the Front Range, the city of